Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And what an honor it is to bring back a cat who has been helping create the foundations of new musical vocabulary on the bandstand for the last 70 years plus, and really no end in sight. We had our first interview maybe last year, and it was really inspiring because he's kind of been all around this world, on the porch stoop with Pete Seeger and other like-minded sort of humanitarians, singing in 1950, and then recording with John Coltrane 8 years later, and then Eric Dolphy and Sesame Street and Bill Evans, and on and on and on and on. But we have a lot more to get to today. Looking for more insight, Chuck Israels, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. You got one thing wrong. You remember a story about Sesame Street, but that was the story of my sending Bob Cranshaw in to sub for me on a gig.
Thank you, my friend. House of Flowers. I screwed it up. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to give credit to Bob Cranshaw where it was due, and not to take credit for things I hadn't done.
Rest in peace, a legend. But that was a great story he told me, because exactly. So we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to listen to this and also, more importantly, pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Well, bebop was the last great step forward jazz took. It was jazz up to the time it got to bebop. Well, when it got to bebop, it was so hit. You had to have another name for it. So that's how bebop came about, the word.
Do people have a proper understanding of what the music is, though, if you call it jazz? They have their own... my feeling about that term is different than other people's, but does it represent... you said that we haven't taken a step forward in that musical progression since bebop.
Well, if you tell us real story, jazz was the original term. It was what those customers at the houses in New Orleans went to do. They went there to jazz, but down in the hall, there was always one of the great piano ticklers,
Sure.
like Jelly Roll. And when somebody would go there, they get asked, "Where you been?" I went to hear me some jazz, or I went to get me some jazz,
What the Mafia was telling you that you did not know about. What were some of the things that they told you?
Well, the thing that was what was most interesting to me was they loved the music because it was African, and they're from Sicily, and that's 17 miles from Africa, so they were all involved. They loved that music. They had heard the rhythm of the drums in their ancestral homes, when they went to Sicily. But they were the ones that came to America and put it together here for us.
So they gave you confidence to know that people liked the music? Is that what you're saying? Or they just supported it because they
just didn't treat us like niggers.
Right.
They treated us like human beings.
That's right.
Like human beings.
That's right. Yep.
That's the whole thing. And so they gave us the best of what they had. And the thing that made it possible was they were selling girls, sex, and all kinds of drugs, cocaine, marijuana, and everything, alcohol, all the alcohol they could get. I used to work at a club in Toledo where they ran alcohol down from Detroit, which was wet.
Sure.
Ohio, it was dry.
Right.
And me and Art Tatum used to stand out in the hall because we couldn't go into the room where the customers went. and the guys used to come by. You know, they park those big old Packard cars outside and come in and take off their overcoats and hats and hang them up and come past Art and me standing there and say, "Hi, kids," and they rub my head, you know, because rubbing a nigger's head was lucky for them.
Thank you for sitting through that, Mr. Israels. Do you want to take a guess at who that is?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I really don't. And I'm an old guy, but I'm not that old.
No, that was, it brings a smile to my face. That was my interview with the late, great John Hendricks. And
It sounded like, I thought it was John's voice, but then that was my immediate response was, that sounds like John Hendricks, but then he was talking about things to which I didn't know he was privy. So I crossed that out of my mind. Who else it might be who spoke like that?
A few things are running through my head, but basically he was playing for the Mafia at the Waiters and Bellman's Club with Art Tatum, and he was just talking. He said the Sicilians didn't treat us like niggers. He said that basically without the Sicilians there'd be no jazz in America. And I know he's stretching the lineage a little bit more than you, but you've seen a bunch of things in your life, and I wonder, sort of a multi-tiered question, but do you believe that without the Sicilians there'd be no jazz in America? And how much of the messages that the sort of commune that you grew up in Massachusetts and used to sing about with Seeger revolved around human rights for people of color and for all human beings?
Okay, those are two questions.
Yes.
The first one is I don't have much perspective about it, except that I think that the fusion of West African and European influences, cultural influences, were inevitable. Those things were simply jammed together as a result of slavery, of the importing of all these West Africans into a European colonized America.
Absolutely.
And that those things were going to fuse almost despite anything. That was going to happen. So Sicilians or anyone else, I don't see it as limited to any particular ethnic or cultural group. It was too powerful a combination of things to stop it. So that's my perspective on that. And as far as,
let me ask you something though, before you go on to the second question. What he was saying was basically that the Sicilians, again, you can say that their means were not moral. They were selling girls, running drugs and alcohol, but they paid the black musicians for the first time. They didn't treat them subhuman. It wasn't like, and that's an opinion.
Jake, I don't have perspective on that. I wasn't there, so I don't know. I'm not that old.
I know, but Pete Seeger, Pete Seeger was in upstate when the Klan was throwing rocks through the bus windows. I mean,
sure. Well,
so I mean, like, you're not that far removed from it, and I just wonder. I mean, to me, like, is it, in your mind, is the birthplace of jazz New Orleans? I mean, that's where a lot of the cats, they started playing these brothels, and I have to believe that along the way, you obviously have had some amazing experiences playing with Arnie Wise and Steve Kuhn and Joan Baez, but at a certain point, I have to believe you were playing clubs that were run by the Mafia.
Well, I played at Birdland in New York, and Oscar Goodstein, I think, was a Jewish mafia guy.
Right, there's mafia all over the place. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, Jake, I don't see I don't follow a useful end to this question. I don't know the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly was involved in political things that didn't have anything to do with jazz. I was in 1948 or 49, I think 48. I was 12, no, maybe 49, in Peekskill, New York, when Paul Robeson, who was my kid brother's godfather, gave a concert, an outdoor concert, and the audience was attacked by people from the American Legion and all kinds of local people throwing rocks and overturning cars and things like that. And I was there at 12 or 13 years old.
You were at that concert. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So I've had my experience with these things. I haven't noticed so much attention to these questions in the jazz world. The jazz world was so mixed in general that it seemed to be a world of its own that wasn't as directly. It was affected by these things, of course, as everyone is.
Sure.
But it seemed to be a kind of self-protected society in which these things were less noticed. But on the other hand, I'm not a black guy, so I didn't walk out on the street and have cops looking at me funny. So I don't know what my, all the things that my black friends, that Max Roach experienced and Barry Harris experienced, and when we weren't together. When we were together, I never noticed anything except that we were all treated equally.
And let me be very clear, Chuck, because I love talking to you because I don't expect you to have answers, but I just want to get your opinions. I don't need, listen, here's the point. Bill Goodwin and Chuck Ray Neapolitan were, they'd go down south on tour with a gospel group backing them up playing rhythm or something, and there'd be the white side of town and the black side of town. You'd wind up staying at different hotels. I remember Lee Charles.
I just hadn't had a lot of that experience. That's all. I'm perfectly aware that it was there.
What was your visit in hindsight? What was your, as a 12 or 13-year-old? It would be very traumatic. Do you have memories of how that whole scene with the Legion, the attack of the Klan, had on you at that time?
Yes, I felt strongly allied with the people I considered to be in agreement with my worldview, and that there were others who didn't hold that view was as disturbing to me then as it is now.
Right.
Are you not disturbed by the number of people
you know what it is?
in your state who are
but I'm just saying, I'm 43, so your perspective is so much deeper than mine. And you actually, whatever, to me, that's why I'm asking you the question, because I realize that, although I am absolutely perplexed and extremely disturbed by the cognitive dissonance and just sort of the abject allegiance to what seems to me to be pure evil. And that is and I think you experienced that up front. And I think, George Wallace, we had 3 TV stations. Your generation could see fundamentally black people being hosed down, sicked by dogs. It was very overt. And now we're living in a very covert racist time. And a lot of people are not doing enough critical thinking. So I'm absolutely disturbed, and I recognize that there's extremes on the both ends, because the carnival circus, end of democracy counting that's going on in Phoenix. On the other side, there's also things like Jake Feinberg that are on the other extreme. So I mean, it's just, I'm always just looking for perspective from people that were totally intermixed with a jazz, for all intents and purposes, was a black subculture, and for a long time.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was, and I was. How can I felt honored to be accepted as a young white Jewish kid. I felt honored to be accepted in a society of people who didn't look like me, and by and large, I was accepted because they were interested in my music and in my personal character.
I remember Steve Kuhn told me that he got a call from Coltrane. They were developing a little bit of a relationship. Then he went over to Train's house and had dinner, and they started to play music together. And at a certain point, Coltrane told him, he goes, I can't really criticize. I can't really be critical of your playing because I respect you too much. I just wonder if there was a moment in the 60s that you can point to when you did feel like you belonged within this, because for me, no matter how great my facility was or my playing ability, being accepted into that subculture would be, like you said, an honor, almost exhilarating, but then you got to get on the bandstand with these cats, and I just wonder if you could point to a seminal moment when that happened for you.
I don't know that there was any one single one. I was certainly glad that Tom Wilson, who was a black record producer, called me to be on that record with Coltrane in 1958. And none of the other guys looked like me, but they didn't look funny at me. Nobody seemed to be disturbed by my presence there. We were a little bit more disturbed by Cecil Taylor's presence because the musical perspective was so different. His musical perspective was I was aligned with Coltrane and Kenny Dorham and Louis Hayes.
Sure.
Musically. Jake, these are questions that are so broad and so deep in our culture that and I'm not sure that I have personal experience that is all that illuminating.
Sure.
I think I've lived, by and large, I've been lucky to have been brought up in a family that where Paul Robeson was my kid brother's godfather, where the family politics were that you were trained and educated not to allow your prejudices to stop you from seeing things more clearly than your emotional prejudices might lead you to see. And so I think I've been a lucky man.
Well, and that's why I love talking to you guys, because it's so far beyond the music. I mean, I just was wondering, so you were clearly, that was the foundation of your point of view of the world.
Yes.
Okay, so then, but like Tom Wilson got hip to you. You had actually never even collaborated, or you didn't know Coltrane going into that session. He just called you for the gig.
Well, Coltrane didn't call me. Tom did.
Tom did.
Coltrane didn't know me from. He had no idea who I was. He just showed up in the recording studio to do a job, and there I was. And he accepted me as he would have accepted anyone who had been called to be in a recording studio with him. I think his patience would have worn thin if I hadn't been able to do the job. But anybody's would, white, black. It didn't have to do. Didn't have to do.
Absolutely
with that.
No.
And,
so I mean, like going from Kuhn and Arnie Wise and Joan Baez in the Haven of Cambridge. Can you talk about your early experiences with Philly Joe or whoever at Birdland? I mean, you had to pass a credibility threshold for Tom Wilson to say this cat belongs.
yes, I don't know when that happened. I don't think it happens suddenly. I think it's cumulative. I mean, people do get breaks, and I did have, as everybody who gets ahead in the world, there are moments of lucky breaks, one or a number of them. But my sense is that that breaks would have come simply by my persistent pursuit of opportunities in the areas that interested me and in which I was prepared to perform. So I don't know. My sense of your questions is that they're a little romantic.
Well, no. First of all, you said this the first time. I mean, this is part of the, whether or not it's baffling or not. I mean, it's part of the magic of my show, because the DJing component of music, which was, Ed Beach, Harry Abramson, that was all well and good when it was popular music, but no longer is that effective enough. The music only tells part of the story, so you have to go even deeper into it and really pull out information. Again, there's no hard answers here. Nobody's saying you're an ethnomusicologist. Nobody's saying you're a sociologist. But for younger cats to understand how assimilation and harmony occurs within people, I mean, you and Kuhn and a ton of other people that are escaping. I mean, it took balls to go into Birdland and get up on the bandstand. Period. It did. Period. I mean, you
okay.
Yeah.
There is a perspective here that I think is missing, that I experienced that you didn't,
Yes.
and that I try to talk about, and that is the general perspective of jazz being related to popular music, and the fact that for an unusual period of time in world history, popular art, particularly in this country, was made by and consumed by educated people, and that is a historical anomaly. I think perhaps Elizabethan theater is some kind of a parallel, but I'm not enough of a historian to understand that fully.
I was just going to ask you, because you said that you brought that up in the first interview, and you're the only cat that I've talked to. You said, and I want you to just extrapolate on this as it relates to where you think we are as a society now. But you said, I thought in 65, when the baby boom generation reached adolescence, and 76 million adolescents were suddenly in the world with money in their pockets. Again, these are uneducated people that you're referring to. I thought there was a revolution that destroyed normalcy in how the market gravitated towards getting teenagers money. Teenage music took over the world and marginalized everything else. I thought,
That's right.
What has happened to this wonderful world that I lived in? That wonderful world was terribly unusual, because if you go back to the early 20th century, late 19th century, pop music was crap then too. I just thought that was the greatest freaking, and so where are we at? How is it continued to have a detrimental impact on our? I know you think it was an anomaly time. I guess maybe I'm romanticizing about that anomaly coming back cyclically at some point. But I just wonder.
Well,
yeah.
It may come back somehow, in the sense that there may be a moment, some kind of parallel moment that happens. It won't be jazz. It'll be, because you don't stop the human spirit from being alive and growing, but when you ask me about or refer to it as being courageous to walk into Birdland, it didn't feel any more courageous to me for me to walk into Birdland than it does for some garage band rock kid to appear on, for instance, Saturday Night Live and make that horrible music that they make, because that was part of the music of the time. It was a more complex version of popular music, but we were in the world adjacent to popular music and almost included in it. And the people that were making popular music were making music to which we could relate. We could relate to Rosemary Clooney and Frank Sinatra and Lena Horne and Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole but that was what you heard that stuff on the radio, and they were all more or less in the same field of music as we were. So it didn't feel courageous at the time. It felt normal at that time. And here you are calling me up and talking to me because you've been stimulated by listening to a record that I made in 1964, but you are not asking me to come to Tucson and create music there now, and my music is at least as good as it was then, and I think better. But you have no particular avenue for making something like that happen. And the reason you don't is because because this relatively sophisticated, educated, intelligent music is marginalized. So here we are.
And it's overlapped. Do you think that educated people in that anomaly, it worked a little bit better? Because not only did you have the boomers coming in with all this money, but now you're also rewarding people, and I'm talking about sports and in music, before they've even done anything as a leader, with more money than they would even know what to do with. So it almost seems like the entitlement has even gotten more perverted and curved. I mean, you were talking about at least in the mid to late 60s, all the guys I've interviewed, Greg Errico from Sly Stone, Michael Shreve, David Garibaldi, these guys were jazz freaks. So there was all this jazz inflection in all this rock music, funk, whatever you want to say. Those guys grew up in that they were impacted heavily by it. I just wonder where, if you feel like it's just been downhill from that time and only gotten more egregious in terms of giving people, like you said, uneducated people, not evolved people, all the power and sort of giving them the keys to the castle before they've even been leaders.
That's the way it looks to me. For example, here's another parallel: musical theater.
Yeah.
Stephen Sondheim, who is not exactly a very American-sounding composer to me, more European-like, but at least an educated musician, still exists. Who's the... I've got a mental block.
It's out of my bag.
No, wait a minute. The composer of Phantom of the Opera.
Let me look it up.
And Les Mis, stupid.
Andrew Lloyd Webber. Andrew Lloyd. Yeah.
There's Andrew Lloyd Webber, who is an incredibly powerful, wealthy composer of music that, from my perspective, has no durability. And so there's another parallel where these things have. There's got to be continuity. There's no continuity in his music. It has no relationship to anything that's gone before. These are complicated aesthetic and cultural questions, and all I know is that I'm sitting here continuing to be affected by the same aesthetic principles that affected me as I was developing as a musician. None of them seemed to have lessened their effect on me. And meanwhile, everything around me has, as you described, gotten less and less good and taken over the environment so much that I'm sitting here alone, pretty much. Well, certainly not exactly alone, but in a small minority of people who appreciate the things that you and I are talking about. And I don't think it's going to come back in the way it was. The only way this music is going to survive is going to be the same way that classical music survives. There have to be institutions that maintain it. And
what is it? What do you mean? I mean, do you mean patrons, or do you mean the academy, or what do you mean institutions?
I mean the academy. Give me well, can I interrupt this for a minute?
Go ahead.
To take a message? Okay, hang on a second.
Right, yeah.
Am I back?
You are back, baby.
Okay.
And so let me, it's okay. No, it's, interestingly enough, Jorma Kaukonen from the Jefferson Airplane and Hot Tuna, I connected with his brother Peter, and their dad was an ambassador and lived overseas in Pakistan and in different places, and at one point they were in Sweden, and he just sent me, and I've been listening to it knowing that I was going to interview you for the today. He sent me the CD of you and Bunker and Bill and Monica Zetterlund. And I wanted you to talk about your memories of that session because, I mean, Chuck, it is some of the most lilted. I mean, next to Irene Krall and obviously some of the legendary cats that you were riffing on before, the singers. I mean, it's bringing me to tears, man. And it's not very well known, but what are your memories of Monica Zetterlund?
Well, she was a lovely, lovely person, and we remained friends for many years. I still remember her telephone number in Lidingö, the suburb that is 71495. I could sort of say it in Swedish, only that you can never say. I can't say the word for seven in Swedish.
Right.
It's a special kind of sound. Monica was great, and she was a live wire as an actress, as a singer, and as a person. And we had a great time. We stayed at her home when we worked for 2 weeks at a club called the Golden Circle, and she was a cast member of something called the Yellow Dog. That was a review, and we would go see the review, and then those people would come in and listen to us night after night after night at the Golden Circle. It was an exciting time. Around the same time as shortly after the recording that you heard before.
Oh, I mean, dude, the Trident lie. It's like I mean, it's strike. I just wanted you to finish up your thought before you got the phone call. Because Pat Martino, he was quoted in my first book as saying, I really enjoy talking about the finer aesthetics of the music with Jake Feinberg. So you hit on this word aesthetics that you've had that haven't changed a lot in you, but they've changed a lot in our culture. And you still adhere to those aesthetics in in the music today, and I was hoping you could spell those out for younger cats, because I will say that, and I don't wish this upon anyone, but Charlie Persip, the late great Persip, said that, the only way that you're going to see a renaissance or growth in the vocabulary of the music that we love is a complete dissolution of civilization. He argues that we don't really have culture anymore. We're one big civilization. In any event, I just wanted you to talk about the aesthetics that remain tried and true for you in your music and your ability to inspire an audience today.
Well, that's you can list some of those things
Right.
that make music work. They are definable in words. But if you talk about them in words without having an understanding of the language of music, then you're not leading anybody to much greater understanding. There is, in the history of the development of human beings and human culture, there is continuity. So something that I do musically has to be built on a language that was invented before me, and I can't throw out the values of that language, the values of Bach, the values of Beethoven, the values of Chopin, the values of Debussy, the values of all of these European great musicians, and how they mixed in with West African influence and became American music. I can't throw that away. So when I hear music that does not contain recognizable relationships, internal relationships with itself, that tells me this kind of an abstract story, whatever that means. If I don't hear that, if I only hear head-banging stupidity, it's meaningless to me. And I think Wynton Marsalis got it really right when he started his whole educational program at Jazz and Lincoln Center and aimed it at high school kids. Because if you don't get kids in high school, you don't get them. If kids grow up throughout high school and never hear any good music, by the time they get to college, it's rare that one will be in any way prepared to accept and to take in the values of good music. And I look at myself and my own limitations, and I can give you a parallel. I'm not a particularly adventurous eater. And because in my youth and through high school, my diet was not very adventurous. My grandmother cooked certain kinds of food for me, and that's the kind of food I eat, and I never really outgrew that. So I think you have to get people, and I go out with people who eat all kinds of things, and I look at them and say, well, gee, that looks adventurous and interesting, but scares me.
Sounds like my dad. No, I mean I love it. I mean, but just to be clear, I mean it's like what you're saying is that, and I think it's spot on. Is just a lot of the modern day music it's first of all, a lot of it's inanimate. It's not made by human beings, so it's being made by machines. And there's really no lineage. You can't trace it back to the roots of the music and so there's no continuity. And then that leads
Exactly.
to, and I think that is it fair to say that, I mean, again, I'm not asking you for an answer, just your opinion, but that the morass that we're in today as a society and in the world is a direct reflection of the music that is consumed by the people that have the means and make and dictate what is popular music. I mean, there's a direct correlation between music and progress. I look at the early 60s, which we vetted pretty hard last time with you and Friedman and Evans. That was the beginning of the civil rights movement, and there were 10 amendments. I mean, it was a decade of amendments. It was heavy progress through about 73, 74. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit deeper about, because you talked about so eloquently if I can just get the guys up here, I'm just going to because again, this is stuff that I don't even necessarily, I consider this stuff to be, I just don't listen to it. It is, although I'm aware of it, it's not my go-to, Gershwin, Porter, Lesser, Warren, Ellington, Fats Waller. I mean, that's what the educated people were listening to at one time. And,
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, is it fair to say that there's a direct correlation between this head-banging insanity, no dynamics in the music, very little understanding of lineage and continuity, and the correlation it has to the chaos that's engulfing this country?
I'm going to say something profound now. I don't know.
You don't. But you have an opinion, or no? You don't. You know.
Well, I think the music is No, I really don't know what has made us stupid as a society, but we are largely stupid. If you look at the politics are stupid, and I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the large number of people who simply ignore things that are right in front of them, obvious to me, facts, in favor of hanging on to disproportionate passions, fearful passions. I don't understand it. I don't know what the cause of it is, except I know that there's something about this fear of education and knowledge that kind of sustains itself. Don't teach real history. Don't talk about the Tulsa
Absolutely.
massacre. Don't talk.
Absolutely.
Don't talk about slavery in Texas history textbooks. The ignorance of the I don't know. Look, Jake, you're talking about questions that are bigger than either of us, and all we can do is maintain our own integrity. And so I maintain my musical integrity, in spite of the fact that there is diminishing support for it, and that diminishing support has been almost 50 years now. I have to look for some little corner of somebody who's interested in what I do. There are two people in Tucson, you and Deborah Sanders. I got two fans in Tucson.
I will just say that for me as a patron and as a journalist, I had probably I was a sports fanatic in high school, and I went through high school in the early 90s. It was a pretty functional time compared to now, and I didn't start seeking authentic music until college. So I'm sort of an anomaly in and of myself. But so,
yeah.
And I understand what you're saying, the impressionable youth. My daughters, for instance, I mean, they're getting a steady diet of Trident 64 and, all sorts of different kinds of amalgamations. But my music, and I have my own limitations. I don't really go outside of a certain era because after a while, it's the music starts to sound like a formula trip. I remember McLaughlin told me that the first gig he played with Miles, they're in the backstage during intermission, and McLaughlin thought Miles played like a god, and Miles came up, he said, "John, I played terrible, man. I'm so sorry, man. I suck tonight." Here's a guy, I mean, to me, it was the philosophy of, you're talking about stupid, or we're just a stupid culture, and that word has negative connotations, but it's uncritical thinking. It's non-critical thinking. And I just feel like the cats from your generation that were in this anomaly in this time, it was you weren't hanging on to greed or power. You even said it yourself. You had to make a name for yourself as a leader. You were searching, but it was just a philosophy about putting it on your shoulders and saying, I want to do something different. I don't want to do something that is in a formula trip. And I guess that's why I continue to do what I do, because I know that it will come back around again. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about now that we're slowly coming out, although I know Washington State is still in the grips of again, because people aren't getting vaccinated. There's a high level of coronavirus up there. But in Portland, can you talk a little bit about what your gut instinct tells you about live performance moving forward? I'm not talking about the number of gigs, and I'm not talking about going back.
I think people are going to be hungry for it, but I don't see it happening yet. I can't predict when it will happen. I do think that, speaking of the ignorance that we were talking about before, and the kind of the passionate hanging on to things for which there is no factual evidence, the people who are hanging on to, I don't want to be vaccinated because it'll put a chip in my ear, or because they're not well tested, or for whatever reason. I have a friend who says, I'm healthy, I don't need it. And I look at him and I say, yeah, but the world needs it. The world needs you to do it.
Well, you just crystallized that's a values thing. It's bigger than just, yeah, exactly.
It's bigger than him.
Yeah, right,
yeah, that's
right,
the point. It's
right.
bigger than you.
Right.
When that's going to, whether that takes shape here or not, I can't tell. I remain moderately, cautiously optimistic that things will come back around, and that people will be hungry for the things that I'm hungry for: human contact. I mean, when friends come to my house, or I see friends that I haven't seen in a while, and we're all healthy and vaccinated, and I throw my arms around them and hug them, I'm hungry for that. I'm desperate for that. So I imagine that people will feel the same about live music and sports and all of the things that we do that make us feel less alone in the world. I'm hopeful.
Are you cautiously optimistic that people might have become bigger seekers coming out of a very humbling time for a lot of people? I'm not talking about the musicians per se, but audiences might take in music that might stretch their ears out a little bit, just because they recognize after this that nothing is certain.
I don't know.
I have another voice to play for you. It's not sociological. It's music-based. So take a listen to it. We'll come back.
Okay.
We have to be self-sufficient as far as rhythm is concerned. We cannot rely on the drum to dictate for us the time and the rhythm, the measurement. We have to be secure in our own ability to stay within the structure, the rhythmic structure. We have these multiples of two, basically, every 4 bars. That's the way we separate that. And if we can feel every 4 bars, then we can feel every 8 bars. And then we can feel every 16 bars. It becomes so natural that we don't have to really count. We just feel the space.
Mm.
So once you're secure in your ability to feel the space, you don't need the drums to keep time for you. But you also have to be very connected. You have to be very connected to that space that you're feeling, because drummers like Elvin, and there are a few others that play within the time, but they're sort of floating with the time. They're not actually marking the time for you. They're playing within the time, but it's like sailing over the time, playing a musical and rhythmical, of course, a musical and rhythmical way, in such a way that it floats. It floats. Nobody's marking. Nobody's telling you, dictating exactly where the downbeats are.
because that puts weight on the time feel. If the downbeats every downbeat is dictated, then it's such a heavy weight on the time feel that there's no excitement there.
Mr. Israels, another person you've probably crossed paths with, maybe collaborated with. You want to take a guess at who that is?
No, but I understand him completely. I don't know
yes, dude. Yeah. Okay, that was my second interview with the most beautiful cat, Julian Priester.
Oh yes. Oh well. Oh, we worked together many times. I've known him forever.
Now, you talk about Riverside? Is it you meet him at Riverside? Because again, we're talking about Orrin Keepnews who's gave him a job.
I met it. We worked in 52 years ago. We worked in Broadway shows together, among other things. He played in the pit orchestra of Promises, where I met my wife.
Are you kidding me? Oh, I love this. Can you? I mean, so can you? I know you can relate to what he's talking about, but I mean, can you talk about when you felt like you had gotten to a point when you were able to fill the space and it was
early. That was my kind of intuitive native strength as a musician was my ability to feel musical timing. I think that's probably what got me in line for the job with Bill when Scotty was killed. Was my sense of timing, because I certainly wasn't harmonically nearly sophisticated enough to match Bill in that way when I first took that job. But I understand exactly what Julian was talking about, and he's not the only one to talk about it that way. I had a violinist, conductor friend, John Garvey, who was the violinist and violist in the LaSalle Quartet, who used to talk about, you don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, you feel music. And I was able to do that pretty early, and I'm not sure where I developed it. It may have been that I played for square dances when I was 12 years old, in a camp in Vermont, when my other 12-year-old bunkmates had to go to bed, I could play the guitar, and I played for the square dances, and I was privileged to be up and playing for the 14, 15, and 16-year-olds while my bunkmates were asleep. And I just, if you see a bunch of bodies bouncing around on the floor, their time has got to be good. It's automatic.
Right.
The gravity and how it acts on your body has a kind of pendulum effect that keeps you steady. So maybe it was that, I don't know. But in any case, I had an intuitive sense of that pretty early on. I don't think I learned it in any academic way, but I certainly was paying attention to it because it was an important element of how you played with other people that were playing this kind of music.
Was it a Jewish summer camp, by the way?
No, it was a Quaker.
It was Quaker.
Yeah.
Wow. So he's talking about not putting weight on the time feel with a predictable downbeat. That is exact. I mean, the idea of dropping bar lines or with Elvin floating through the time was your. Can you talk about some? I mean, you played with Ben Riley. You did say you weren't psychically in sync with Cecil Taylor. What was difficult about the time feel with Cecil?
Well, it was disturbing because here now we're going to be putting words to something that
it's hard to describe. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, it's much more easily demonstrated in music. And music being the abstract thing that it is, these timing relationships, I suppose you could make a graph of them and actually see them if you look on now on a digital audio workstation. You can see you can see it in front of you now. Wait a minute. Let me backtrack a little bit.
Sure,
here.
man.
I'm working on this. Okay, so you're talking about not marking the downbeats.
That's why Bill loved you. That's what I hear with you in Bunker. It's suspense. It's urgency. It's tension and release.
But we knew where every downbeat was. We felt where every downbeat was. And I had worked in 1962 with a famous, wonderful musician who could not play unless the drummer was playing downbeats, every downbeat as loud and galumphingly and almost in a jazz way, almost as obviously as the rock bands do. That was Benny Goodman.
Wow.
I worked with Benny, and the drummers, he hired me and Joe.
Joe Raposo?
No, Joe, the drummer, Joe. Oh, God, names.
I'll get it.
The drummer I worked with George Russell.
Joe Hunt.
Joe Hunt,
yeah,
right.
A legend, yeah.
He hired me, he's a wonderful drummer and a wonderful guy.
A great guy.
And he hired both of us, and he couldn't understand Joe's drumming. So then he hired Dottie Dodgen, who was terrible. And then he hired Mickey Sheen, who was almost as terrible. And they just played galumphingly everything vertical, everything downbeat oriented. And, you talked about Larry Bunker. You brought this whole thing is taking shape. This whole discussion is because you remarked on how extraordinary Larry Bunker's playing was. And Larry was one of the best. I've had great luck with a lot of wonderful drummers, but Larry was one of two or three that were so extraordinary that it's hard to describe what great musicians they were. Larry was an extraordinary musician. And both of us understood and felt where 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 was without having to mark every iteration of it. But the idea that we were ignoring it is a false idea. We were not ignoring it. We were simply playing more complex cross rhythms than was the norm before the language that Bill Evans and Scott LaFaro and Larry and I developed. But we weren't alone. It was kind of it wasn't the invention of any one person. It's just that the idea of having to go play every quarter note on the beat was simply being pushed aside in favor of knowing where that quarter note was and being able to play it sometimes in order to solidify things, and then to move away from it and play in other in-between places, play quarter note triplets, play dotted quarter notes, play half notes, play dotted half notes, play all kinds of rhythms, knowing that quarter note was always there and that we could always find it if we needed it. And Larry was an expert at that.
Oh my God! I mean, the brushwork with you, man. It's just propulsive. I mean, again, going back. Good. You said Goodman was 62, and he couldn't handle. He needed you on.
It was 1962.
1962. I mean.
Yeah.
So you think that I think it's really about letting the body dance. I mean, you learned whether those the square dancing, you were playing to dancers and you were letting yourself dance to the music.
Of course.
You know,
exactly.
It wasn't.
That's exactly right.
You know, I mean, did some of it, like, I think Bunker was obviously, I mean, he's well known to a lot of people as being a mainstay in the studios on the West Coast. Him and Milt Holland. I know Cal Jader was like this. I mean, vaudeville. Did you think vaudeville played a role in the ability for the drummers to dance and float through the time?
I'm not old enough to tell you the answer to that.
I'm just trying to figure out, when you played with Ben Riley or a lot of it was subliminal, a lot of it was nonverbal. But can you talk?
Almost all of it was nonverbal. And that's why talking about it now seems a little bit strange.
Well, it's strange because this is the only show that's doing it, and I've been doing it 10 years with 2,000 interviews plus, so it's 4 books. So it's not irrelevant, and it might seem abstract, but it's absolutely essential. And so, basically, I guess maybe the first, would you say that you started to let the body dance with Arnie and Steve Kuhn, and I'm talking more like improvisational instrumental music. Was that the beginning? Mm-hmm. Was that really the beginning of it? Or do you think it started before?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, it probably started before, but it probably started before. I mean, if you listen to something as, if you listen to Pete Seeger or the Weavers, who were absolutely wonderful. Did you know that group?
Absolutely.
That was sophisticated rhythmically, harmonically. Not as, it wasn't as sophisticated as Bill Evans, but it wasn't ignorant. It had great life and great humanity, and all of this music that we're coming around to something. I'm having a thought that's perhaps useful.
Good.
What the music I play represents in an abstract way is my experience as a human being, as a human animal who's affected by gravity, who's affected by bodily functions, who's affected by emotions, and my music has to represent those things. It doesn't have to because I say it, because of some philosophical construct
right.
that says that's just what I am impelled to do with my music, is to express my humanity. Okay, that's one side. Then look at, I'm going to take some example or a group of examples of the kind of music that you see on late night TV or on Saturday Night Live. I'm not talking about the band. I'm talking about the acts that come at the end of the show.
Totally.
That has no relationship to my experience as a human being. I don't understand the experience of those people. They're yelling at me. They're unintelligible. They are moving in ways that look more like machines than they do like animals. The rhythms of the music are mechanical, not human. The sounds are the sounds of the instruments are unrelated to the human voice. The singing itself is generally it doesn't sound like a voice I would like to listen to talking to me. So I'm attracted to music that makes me feel more connected with the world, not less connected to it. When I see, Margot happened to pull up on YouTube yesterday a whole bunch of stuff with Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor, dancers. Incredibly beautiful dancing. They look like wonderful human dancers. I see dancing on television now that looks like people making a great effort to look like machines. And I'm momentarily fascinated by it. I think, that look at them doing that. But it doesn't have the same emotional effect as watching the great athleticism and beauty of Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire, or the Nicholas Brothers, or watching Simone Biles, that I watched on television yesterday, win this championship, doing these incredible things, but obviously human, maybe extra human or superhuman, but
Right.
human nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the fascinating thing about it. The fascinating thing about watching Simone Biles is that she is doing something that is at the acme of humanity. It doesn't eliminate the human part of it. It shows how far you can develop that human athleticism. Anyway, but that's I'm very much attracted to things that seem to remind me of being alive in my own skin. That doesn't mean I'm not interested in what other people are doing or what other people feel, but I generally relate to those whose expressions of their lives at least overlaps mine.
I mean, you look at it, it's, you talk about the correlation, even though, we're not experts in these areas, although we know that a lot of the country rejects experts. You don't need to be an expert, they say, which is, folly. But, you look at the integration of technology within humanity in the last couple of decades, and it's no surprise that people are imitating a mechanized rhythm. And human drummers playing machine parts, and people, what they call twerking, very rigid, quick moving, spastic dancing, no real alacrity, no space. I mean, there's no you guys, for what it was, even though there were technological advances big time in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, nowhere near the separation. And you talk about the collective, the story that you tell. Remember Dave Holland always saying that the older cats would say, what story do you have to tell? And that was a life experience of being a road dog and, going hungry for a couple days and, showing up with a migraine or a sprained ankle or some cruddy gig where the sound sucks, but you played the best show you've ever played and you have no idea why. All that stuff is your story to tell. Today, people's stories are right in front of their face on their phone. So they're less connected to humanity, period. They don't know how to relate to human beings as much. Even the clips that I just played you, Julian Priester, the fact that you were with him in the pits, burning it up. You were connected. You had to face people. You had to have dialogue. And then ultimately that conversation transpired on the bandstand. What you just described is what your music is today, and even more. And I actually think that there's a lot of people that would crave that, but I'm not sure if they're aware enough because the technology has become such a block amongst actual human relation.
I think you are describing a lot of my daily experience. And I don't know.
Yeah,
we're in it up to our necks,
I mean, and all I'm saying is it's still, I mean, it must be maddening as a creator, somebody who has, for me, I can still go back, and if I have a headache or I've had a hard day, I can throw on, the stuff with you and Monica Zetterlund and Bill or the Trident, and get peace. It still brings me peace, even though I wasn't alive at that time. I have no point of reference. I don't know the people, but there is resonance there. And I just think that moving forward, before we wrap up, I did want you to talk about the first time that you laid eyes on your wife and what was so inspiring about her that you fell in love with her.
Well, we met in two shows, an off-Broadway show a year and a half before the Broadway show. And I was occupied chasing another woman. And we had conversations. I knew her. We we had social contact, but I wasn't all that deeply interested in her. Then we were on the road with this Burt Bacharach, Hal David, Neil Simon show called Promises, Promises. And we just became friends. And thrown together in, with time on our hands between rehearsals and performances in Boston and Washington, D.C., wandering around having meals, having me show Margot around Cambridge and Boston, which was partly a home to me and not to her. And at some point, I discovered that I cared for this person in a different way than I had experienced with other women. With other women, I was excited by the fact that I was afraid of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear is very exciting. You think it's love.
I dig.
It's not love.
It's a good way of putting it, yeah.
But it is emotionally, it is exciting, that fear. And I had a very different experience with Margot. I didn't have any fear. I had the sense that we simply enjoyed each other, liked each other, cared for each other, and there wasn't any fear. There wasn't fear of rejection. She wasn't going to reject me. I wasn't going to reject her. There it was. Suddenly I said, oh, this is what love is. That other stuff is something else. This is what love feels like. It's a deep, deep, reliable friendship. And it's been that way for 52 years. And I can't even explain. I don't even know why it was possible that could happen, but it did.
You guys genuinely enjoyed spending time together, even when you were just friends. It just,
yes.
Yeah, you could be doing nothing important. It was just being in the presence of the person. There was a stillness or a peacefulness that was not present with other women.
That's right.
I don't know if I asked you this in the first interview, but he's a dear friend of mine, and I've done about 8 interviews with him. But I know you had the seminal moment with Baez at Club 47. Did you ever get the chance to cross paths or do any work with Hugh Romney, better known as Wavy Gravy?
No.
Yeah, he was at the Gaslight a lot, and he would bring Jackie Byard and Jimmy Jufree and those cats up to the Golden Lion in Hartford to do jazz and poetry. But would you have any gigs on the books right now, Chuck, or anything that you want to talk about moving forward? Because I'm hitting the road. Things are starting to move again a little bit, and again, we've just been talking about the aesthetics and what we desire, and I don't know when that'll come back, but I'm just wondering about if you have anything any irons in the fire for the rest of 2021.
I have little. I have a recording project in Cremona in January of 22. That is a high-class, well-funded project with a string quartet and a German guitarist named Wolfgang Muthspiel, who plays classical guitar and is an improviser, and Aiden Karamazov, who's I think a Bosnian guitarist.
Wow.
Both of them great virtuosi. And I've written a couple of pieces for a couple of arrangements for the string quartet and the 2 guitars and me. And I'm kind of juggling the possibilities of some other things, but there isn't very much. And for whatever reason, I am neither the young flavor of the month nor the old venerated guy who can get a gig just because he's been around all this time.
Yeah, but
So
you know
it's
what?
pretty-
I mean, you're still okay, but that's at the very superficial commercial level. And I realize you want to sing for your supper, which you've been doing, but don't put any self-deprecation, man. I mean, in my mind, you know, everything that you stand for is what it's about, and I guess that's, you know, I think that a lot of people who've been around a long time, people like Tony Bennett and people like rock guys, and you know, guys that are just going to go back to doing the same old formula trip, play the same regurgitated hits that they've played forever, the same way all the time, and it's not going to help. And I think that what you're doing and the music you're making, and even if there's 1 or 2 gigs a year, if they're satisfying for you as far as your connection to people and your connection to humanity, then it will live on forever. And when somebody listens to this interview 50 years from now, I'll email you a letter I got from a guy in France yesterday about the impact that my show has had on him. It's unquantifiable, Chuck. And I realize, you know, we want to sing for our supper. You want to pay the bills. I get that. Don't ever.
Jake, it's a little more than that, and you are correct about the value.
What's more to it? Tell me more. What's more to it? Yeah.
These occasional things that happen. The thing that's missing from that is that when you only do them every 2, 3, 6 months,
right?
In a way, there's too much invested in that one performance and not enough practice.
You're right. It's too precious. I agree.
Yeah. It gets too precious, and it gets removed from the everyday, quotidian experience of constant music making. And what you hear when you listen to the recordings that affect you so much, that you love, the Trident records and the records with Monica, even though Monica was an extra insertion into the language of the trio. But what you are hearing there is music that we made every day,
right,
constantly. We didn't have to. There were little specific things we had to pay attention to, but we knew the music was going to work because we did it all the time. It's like it's like a sports team. You know, it's like watching the Golden State Warriors or something, or some basketball team that operates as a team. They do it. They're doing it all the time, every day. They couldn't. Those things that you watch that are so thrilling, if they had to do them once every 3 months, they'd be nowhere near the level that we're used to seeing them. So I miss that.
You're right. You're talking about the continuity of life and music. That's it. I mean, it's the flow of a game. You see these guys, and they're playing at such a high level, and they're moving the ball, and it's like a ballet or a dance. And it's because they do it every day. And like you said, musically, it atrophies. Then you get a gig 3 months, and it's not going to be fresh. I think that's what you guys were expressing honest, in the moment feelings without any anxiety or angst, because you were doing it every day and you knew you'd be doing it tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a different circumstance than what we face now.
You're darn right.
And a much better one.
You know what? And after 80 minutes, I think we finally we made some progress today, Chuck. And I love you, man. I really look forward, and I hope that I get the chance to come see you play live in person sometime, man. I wish I could get you a gig in Tucson, but it's pretty bone dry around here too. And like I said, I hope that some sentient beings coming out of this thing will be seeking more authentic music that can be played on a consistent basis, so that cats like you can wash away the dust of everyday life for people that are pretty caught up in technology and also unobjective, non-critical thinking, because we're on the cliff, man, and we got to hang on somehow.
Well, I continue to. Nothing, you can't stop me, so
Right.
I'm stuck in this.
Well,
rut, so.
it's the old
It's
line.
either a groove or a rut. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's how I am.
Well, I'd say you're more like, one of those amazing sports athletes. The line is you can't stop Chuck Israels. You can only hope to contain him. So,
Okay.
just keep swinging, man. It was great to hang again. Thank you so much, brother.
Thanks, Jake.
Later
Okay.
on, man.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye.
It's a nice way to start off the week. Spooner Olden, and then great bassist Chuck Israels. Just trying to keep people alive, keep them alert, keep them thinking. That's it for the Jake Feinberg